Welcome to session number 10 of Biblical Backgrounds. I'm here with a group of friends from the Philippines and from Italy. I'm Dr. John McMath, retired from the Moody Bible Institute, and we get together here twice a week to share the backgrounds of the Bible. And this is a general purpose course that helps us to see the illustrative values of all kinds of stuff, history and geography and archaeology, every once in a while a bit of linguistics and anthropology. There's all kinds of stuff that helps us to understand the Bible better. Something that I need to point out every once in a while, in biblical backgrounds, we're not particularly trying to prove the Bible. I don't believe the Bible needs proof. The Bible is the Word of God, and we know that what we have there is accurate. But there are some parts of the Bible that sometimes we don't understand. And biblical backgrounds helps us to understand it better by giving us a broader background of the biblical world against which to contrast what the Bible actually says. And we trust the Bible. But in addition to the Bible, sometimes backgrounds help us see it a little better. So that's what we're doing here. Okay. And that, by the way, is for those who are not regulars with us. Okay, we're always happy to have everybody here. Okay, I've got a chat. Okay, yeah, okay. Let me see here. Which one do I want? Okay, this is the one I want, I think. Oh, it's trying to give me a whiteboard. I do not want a whiteboard. So we're going to try this again. Share. And yeah, share this one. All right, is that going to work? Let's watch it happen. Okay, it is not happening the way it's supposed to. I just love that. Okay, I'm going to stop this share. Try to make it happen again. Start from scratch. Okay, should be this one right here. No, it should be this one right here. Okay, there, okay. We're going to start today with Joshua. Actually, Joshua's closing years, and then the beginning of the period of time that we call the Judges period. Judges lasts from roughly 1400 BC until roughly 1100 BC. The beginning and ending of that time is fairly well set in stone. If the Exodus happened in 1446, which is nailed down by just the biblical data, the 1 Kings 6:2 passage that tells us that it happened 480 years before the dedication of the temple, nails it down. So we know we've got 1446. There's other archaeology that nails it down to 1446. If the wandering took 40 years, that puts the conquest around 1400, 1406 to be precise, but we can use round numbers here. 1400 is a good round number, just generally speaking. Let's see, what am I doing here? Okay, get some stuff straightened up here. 1100 is the end of the Judges period. Jephthah is the last of the judges. Samson and Jephthah are really pretty much the same time. And these guys were operating when the Ammonites were on one side, the Philistines were on the other. We know the Philistines did not arrive in force until around 1158 BC. We've got that on archaeological grounds. We can't put them there very much earlier than that. We know that Jephthah comes prior to Samuel. Samuel is the prophet, priest, judge character who introduces the Saul and David narratives. And we've got to put Saul at about 1050 BC. So Samuel, in order to last through the life of Saul and into the life of David, can't be functioning very much earlier than 1070 or so, 1080 BC. So the Judges period has to close before the beginning of Samuel's life, and it has to begin after the death of Joshua, when the conquest is complete. And Jephthah, at the end of Judges, tells the Ammonites that they don't have a right to challenge the ownership of the land where they're living because it's been 300 years. And during all that time, you haven't said anything. Now, why are we having this conversation? So the length of the Judges period has to be about 300 years. That, of course, doesn't add up. If you add up the years just in a linear fashion, all of the years of all of the judges, it adds up to about 480, 500, depends on how you add these things up. And the answer to that problem is that the judges didn't rule consecutively. They often overlapped. Jephthah and Samson, for example, operated at the same time in two different places. And their stories are sequential, but the years overlapped. So we're looking at about a 300-year period. And that 300 years exactly dovetails with everything else that we have from biblical history. So we're looking at the end of Joshua's life. Israel's settlement was not a quick or simple thing. And there's an awful lot that we don't understand about this period. We believe what the Bible says, but the Bible doesn't tell us nearly as much as we'd like to know. Finding traces of the Israelite settlement is one of the great challenges of modern archaeology, because frankly, the early Israelites didn't build monuments. They didn't build grand cities with castles on hills. They lived in simple mud houses like the one you see here in the photograph. This is what we call a 4-room house. I'm going to go over to I'm going to stop this share and use my iPad to draw you a picture here in just a second. But that's a 4-room house that you see in the picture on the right. On the left is the little courtyard of that house, with what is probably food preparation area on the right and some storage in this lower photograph. Grain storage was in a pot that was placed in the ground. There would have been a cover over the top of that. This is a fairly typical late Bronze II housing situation. And this particular one is from a Philistine settlement. So it wasn't only Israelites who lived like this. Let me make this go away. I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to try to start my other share. See if I can do this. This is always hard. Stop this one, and then I'm going to come here and share a whiteboard. Okay, is that working? Yes. The 4-room house, a classic thing. We call it a 4-room house because it has 4 rooms. Yes, everybody is wondering, how come we call it a 4-room house? And the structure is roughly square. They could be 7 to 10 meters on a side, never bigger than 10 meters on a side. There's a room in the back. There's a room along one side. And there's a open area here. Now, often there'll be a way to close this front area. There may be a way to close the back, sometimes a little of that going on. But here's a long room, or I guess we call this a broad room, and then 2, 3, and 4. The broad room is usually a place for animals or for storage of animal feed and whatever have you. The room that I've labeled 2 is open on one side. It has a roof, but it's open on one side so that the air can circulate. The room that I've called 3 is open to the sky. There's no roof. And room 4 has not only a roof, but also a wall. So in cold weather, the family could crawl into room number 4 and curl up and sleep. In warm weather, which is most of the time, people would sleep in room number 2 or 4 or up on the roof, or they could get more comfortable. This is not a great big house. Let me stop the share and we'll go back to what I was working in just a moment ago. Look at this picture of the 4-room house, and you'll see what I mean. It's made of mud brick and then covered up with a kind of plaster. The mud on the roof is laid over the top of sticks. They'll take poles made of whatever wood they can get, and then put material like bamboo over the top of those longer poles, and then mud interspersed with more sticks over the top of that. The construction is often called wattle and daub. And, the wattle is the sticks and the daub is the mud. They're surprisingly waterproof as long as they're maintained. And after a rainstorm, people would have to go outside and repair the roof right away. And when we find settlements like this, we'll often find the remains of a stone roller up on the roof. Only it won't be on the roof anymore; it will have fallen down. But the stone roller would be used to settle the roof again. Very interesting thing. So the Israelites lived like this. When their houses were abandoned, they collapsed right away, very quickly. The rain simply washed them away, and the sticks and brush that made up the roof simply rotted out, and it was gone. So we don't expect to find much. It would be nice if we could find more, but we only find what we can. We know that the tabernacle accompanied Israel in the wilderness. And when the people finally settled in Canaan in a permanent location, the tabernacle lived near this place. This is my wife, Donna. These many years ago. My goodness, it's 40 years ago. No, 35 years ago, Donna and I were in Israel the first time together. And we stopped near the location of Shiloh, not too far south of Shechem and north of Jerusalem on the Central Hill Country route. And Shiloh is real close to here. It hadn't been excavated at all when I was last there. But since that time, the British have been there, and there's an American group that's going to be there this summer. And I'm looking forward to getting some more pictures from Shiloh. Although, again, the tabernacle was a tent after all. And we don't expect to find a lot of architecture from the area, but this is the general look of the place where that happened in the Central Hill Country. Okay, this map will give us more or less the layout of the tribes. The tribal boundaries are surprisingly well known and well laid out. We can actually be fairly sure of where everybody was. On the Transjordan side, you can see half of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben have their spots. And a little farther toward the east is Ammon. North of north of Ammon is going to be Syria. South of Reuben, you can see Moab. And the plains of Moab moved ever so far south, down past the Arnon Gorge. On the Cisjordan side, the west side of the Jordan River, starting in the south, Judah has the largest area. Simeon has pasture land amongst Judah. And so for the rest of Israel's existence, Judah and Simeon were essentially one tribe. Dan and Benjamin are directly north of Judah. And Benjamin actually has a southern line that runs right through Jerusalem. We can actually walk that line. It runs along the road that sits at the north side of the old city of Jerusalem today. And as you're walking toward the west, you run right past the modern YMCA hotel, which is kind of fun. It is just knowing, and we know where the line is because these administrative lines were they're very logical, and they're exactly where they are supposed to be. The tribe of Dan has this dog leg from the Central Hill Country all the way out to the Mediterranean. You can see the port city of Joppa or Yaffo. North of Joppa is Tel Aviv. Modern Tel Aviv is at about the intersection of Dan and Manasseh. Now, in time and in the biblical story, during the time of the judges, the tribe of Dan failed to take adequate land away from the Philistines. They lost it to the Philistines, essentially. And that tribe migrated toward the north, completely outside of the will of God. They were not godly people at all. They migrated north and ended up, you can see way at the left-hand end of this map, is the tribe of Dan, near a place called Laish. In between Lebanon on one side and Syria on the other. The tribe of Ephraim is Joshua's tribe. That takes the Central Hill Country just north of Benjamin. North of Ephraim, Manasseh has land that goes all the way up to the Carmel Gilboa Ridge, and from the Jordan all the way to the Mediterranean. Manasseh actually got a very nice piece. Manasseh occupies both sides of the Jordan River. And Manasseh and Ephraim, as you'll probably remember, are the sons of Joseph. So when we talk about the Joseph tribes, we're talking about Ephraim and Manasseh, and they occupy a lot of territory in the Promised Land. North of Manasseh, we find what we call the Galilee tribes: Issachar, Zebulun, Asher, and Naphtali. And those are kind of hard to remember, but this is where they are. Right on the edge of Zebulun and Issachar, at that boundary, is the spot where Nazareth is located. And we're pretty sure about all of the locations of these things. Asher probably never fully occupied its territory. There were always going to be some problems with Asher. At any rate, those are the tribal territories. It's somewhat helpful to remember whose territory is whose. Not all the time. If you can remember that Judah is in the south and all of the other tribes are toward the north, you're doing really well most of the time. Okay, let's go on to the next one. The Judges period, as we've mentioned, is this 300-year period. The overlapping judges are not in a real true chronological order. When we read the book of Judges, it's obvious that the author of Judges, who I think may well have been Samuel, Samuel's authorship of Judges is the position taken by the Babylonian Talmud. The early Jewish rabbis thought that Samuel wrote Judges, and modern scholars like to dismiss that idea, but I think it actually makes pretty good sense. I'm probably the only Bible teacher you'll ever meet who thinks that, but I think Samuel makes really good sense. His suspicion of a king applies very well to the judges. You look at all of these, the 12 canonical judges, and how good they were or how bad they were doesn't seem to matter. They all fell short. The message of Judges seems to be, don't rely on human government. Expect the government to do its best. But in the long haul, we're all going to have to trust ourselves, and we're going to have to learn to trust God. Because the real ups and downs of this period are the result of spiritual principles. As the people trusted God, things went well for them. When they failed to trust God, their civilization fell apart. And this is a theological issue, of course, and it's clear to me that the author of Judges is primarily a theologian. He cares about this. The chronology just wasn't on his screen. We can figure it out, but it is, again, not the important thing. The Hebrew term for judge is shofet, and is probably misleading in the translation. I may have mentioned this when I was teaching the book of Judges, but our modern notion of a judge is a fellow in a black coat with a white wig who sits in traffic court and passes out fines is not right. The judges were kind of military, political leaders who rose during this period to lead the people in the absence of a king. Some have called them charismatic in the sense that they seem to have a spiritual or spirit-filled ability to do what they needed to do. The judges are a fascinating period, and I've enjoyed studying the judges for many years now. I wrote a commentary on this for the Moody commentary. But at any rate, there was no one judge who led all of Israel at any one time. Generally, they were located in just one tribal area, sometimes two, and they had their own local following. Okay, the broader world turns out to be fairly important at this time. Egypt had its ups and downs. During the period of what we call Late Bronze 1, from about 1550 to about 1400 BC, Egypt was very important. Beginning around 1400 BC, Egypt seems to have walked away for about 100 years under a couple of kings. Akhenaten was the first, and one of his descendants, Tutankhamun, King Tut of the famous tomb, walked off into a kind of heresy where they worshipped the disk of the sun rather than the sun itself. From our point of view, it's all heresy and it's all paganism. But for the Egyptians, this was a heretical position, and this is a really bad thing. And those kings didn't spend much effort on the outside world. Around 1304, Ramses the Second came to the throne. And this photograph on the right shows Ramses the Second as he saw himself, bigger than life and magnificently handsome, wearing a throne or wearing a crown and seated in a vast palace. The palaces and temples of Ramses II are all over Egypt, particularly in the area of Karnak and in Memphis or Cairo. And we still find those today. This particular Ramses statue is at the Karnak temple compound in Luxor. It's a great tourist trap. Great place to go if you like taking pictures of Egyptian stuff. Ramses reigned for 67 years. He's the longest reigning pharaoh that we know of. One of the characteristics that the Bible tells us of the king prior to the king of the Exodus is that he was a very long reigning king. So during the middle or during the late or new kingdom of Egypt, there are only two kings who reigned 40 years or more, Thutmose III and Ramses II. So either the son of Thutmose III or the son of Ramses II has to be the king of the Exodus. For after all those days, we're told in Exodus, the king who hated Moses died, and he was replaced by yet another king. And at that time, Moses went back and confronted him. So either the son of Thutmose III, who would be Amenhotep II, and the date would have been 1446 BC, or the son of Ramses II, who was Merneptah. Merneptah reigned from 1237 to 1227 BC. I know I'm sounding like a professor. And Merneptah is famous for making an expedition to Canaan in about 1232. Might have been as early as 1233, and some put it as late as 1230, doesn't matter. And after that expedition, he put together a stele. We call it the Merneptah stele, that I have a photograph of here, middle of the page. On the Merneptah stele, among other things, is the note that claims Israel is defeated, his seed is no more. And that's the hieroglyphics in the very bottom left of that photograph. And I don't expect you to remember the hieroglyphics, but that's what that says. And the term Israel there is a reference to a settled people who are not necessarily a nation state. This would be used of nomadic people groups or semi-sedentary people groups who perhaps still lived in tents. And that's exactly what we expect of Israel. And that's at 1232 BC. If Merneptah is the pharaoh of the Exodus, how does this work? How does the 40-year wandering work? Merneptah only reigned for 10 years. How does it work? Ramses the Second can't be the pharaoh of the Exodus because his father only reigned about 4 years. It doesn't work. And those who want a late date for the Exodus have to deal with the actual evidence on the ground. This is among that. So the note provides an absolute latest possible date for Israel's entrance into Canaan. It couldn't be any later than 1230. And the late date proposals don't work. They just, they simply don't work. Okay, let's go on to the Judges period. We'll just look at a couple of judges. Deborah is interesting. Deborah and Barack, fairly early on. Deborah's story is interesting because she's the only female judge. Her scope of influence is somewhere in the central hill country. But her greatest challenge was the fight against a northern power from Hatzor. Along the way, Deborah chose Barack to be the military commander of the army. And Deborah is fascinating because she's obviously a married woman. Her husband is named, but we never see him. Deborah has quite a following. She seems to have operated as an advisor, a spiritual stroke political advisor, and operated as a prophet. And there's a lot of mystery here. There are questions that we don't have answers for. So Deborah and Barack, Judges chapter 4 and 5, tell us this story. Deborah picked Barack, whose name means thunder, by the way, was still used today in modern Hebrew. Barack raised an army. He wasn't very happy about it, but he raised an army and took the high ground, which is Mount Tabor. And that hubcap-shaped hill that you see in the background of this photograph is Mount Tabor. Let's see if I can get you another shot of it. Here's another shot from a different angle. That little bit of a bump on the very top is a church. Roman Catholics, of course, came in after the time of Constantine and built churches on all of the holy places they could find in Israel. And the Roman Catholics decided that Mount Tabor had to be the Mount of Transfiguration. I think that's silly. It's too far away. Jesus and his guys were at Caesarea Philippi, which is way, way up in the north, 70 miles farther north. Why would they walk to Mount Tabor for the Transfiguration when Mark says immediately they went up to a high place nearby and Jesus was transfigured? So it has to have been on a spur of Mount Hermon, way up in the north. Anyway, this is Mount Tabor. And from the top of Mount Tabor, you have a view of the entire Jezreel Valley. This is me in my 40-year ago look, back when my hair was still black. And that whole valley down there is the Jezreel Valley. And it's from Mount Tabor that Barack was able to watch the approach of Sisera's army. Sisera was the general under King Jabin of Hatzor. And here they came, and they ended up watching the chariots come up this valley. The Jezreel Valley is well known as good farming country, but it's also known as poorly drained country. The rivers that run through here drain rather slowly. This is very flat land, very close to sea level. And in antiquity, this was always swampy, just about all year long. You could rarely count on solid ground for transportation. In the modern era, there's quite a bit better drainage because the Israelis understand about the importance of drainage to keep malaria from killing people, and also for transportation and for farming. Still, the ground here tends to be what we call sub-irrigated. The water is directly underneath. It's very close to the surface. And to this day, if you want to move heavy equipment in the Jezreel Valley, you've got to build a road. You don't just head across country with a truck. It doesn't work. It will get up to its hubs in mud. The same thing would happen to chariots in the ancient world, especially during the spring or fall. When it was rainy, you could count on getting your chariot stuck in the mud. This is a view from Tel Megiddo, which is just a little farther west than that last photograph. You can see I shot this on a kind of a foggy day and looking out over the valley of the Kishon. The Kishon is one of several rivers, small seasonal rivers, that drains the Jezreel Valley. This is a swampy place. It's also a good place for a battle. Let me show you a map here. This map has the Sea of Galilee in the middle at the top, and shows most of the area of Galilee. The southern rim of this map has the Carmel Gilboa ridgeline. Now I'm going to put a circle around Megiddo. Okay, Megiddo is right in the middle of this ridgeline. And traditionally, Megiddo has been the checkpoint on the international highway. The highway from Egypt to Mesopotamia came through the Carmel Ridge at Megiddo. And throughout history, Megiddo has been the spot where armies have had to either attack or make their stand. Egypt, I can list 3 or 4 major battles that the Egyptians fought here. The Hittites fought here in more modern times. Napoleon fought here. General Allenby during the First World War fought here. Well, what's going on? Well, the main road crosses this place. If you're coming from the south, you have to put your army in a long, thin line to get through the road in the mountains. And when you come through, you are right at Megiddo. And if an army is waiting for you there, you've got serious trouble. If you're coming from the north, you're on the main road coming past Mount Tabor, all through the Jezreel Valley in single file on the only road that goes through the swamp. So again, by the time you get to Megiddo, you're all strung out, and the army that's waiting for you can pick you apart bit by bit. The modern Israelis know this. They know that if they're ever attacked from the north, which they would be if Iran or Turkey or Iraq, any of their Mesopotamian neighbors decided to attack, that attack would come through the north, through the Golan Heights, around the Sea of Galilee, then past Mount Tabor, and would have to come south on the road past Megiddo. That's where the road still goes. There are other roads that are alternates, but none of them are as good as this. So throughout all of history, this has been the place where battles have been fought. It's the choice battlefield. This is the location of the Battle of Armageddon in the book of Revelation. And Armageddon is actually a bigger battle than just here, but this is symbolic of a great battle. And this is going to be one of those spectacularly catastrophic battles that will end the world. I pray that it isn't anytime real soon. At any rate, Jabin sent his army, a chariot army. Barack came down off the top of, let's see, Jabin lives up here at Hatzor, and that distance is only about 30 kilometers. It's not very far at all. Megiddo is toward the south, and there's Mount Tabor right in the middle. The battle took place out in the middle of that valley someplace. We've got a red battlefield symbol, but that may not be where it actually happened. And the chariots ran into swamps. They got into soft ground. The soldiers got out and began to run. Among those soldiers was the general Sisera, who on his way to safety stopped at the tent of Jael, the wife of a Kenite, a nomadic tribal group who were friends of Israel, who are part of the group that descended from Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. So here they are. Here's Jael, and Jael drove a tent peg through Sisera's head, right in this spot. We don't know exactly where the Oak of Zaanaim is, but it has to be in that general area. Okay, little of that goes a long way. It's kind of fun to actually know how the geography affects these things. Okay, let's go on. Iron Age 1 begins around 1158. Archaeologists typically say 1200 BC, and that's really probably pretty close. My friend David Usishkin, the archaeologist, suggests that 1158 is a better date because that's when the Philistines arrived at Tel Lachish. That hasn't been generally accepted. Everybody says 1200, but I think he's right. 1158 is probably real close. The characteristic of the Iron Age in Palestine is the rise of Israel as an independent nation. The kings of Israel unified the nation and set the people on a path toward real international power. The surveys that have been done in the central hill country, there's some real important guys, and I'm not going to list archaeologists. Israeli archaeologists have gotten famous for doing surveys in this area. You send 100 students 100 yards apart from each other across a broad area of ground and just keep track of everything you find, walking 10, 15 kilometers a day. It's a really, really important piece of work, but I've never had opportunity to do that. But the surveys reveal a building explosion. They just built like crazy during this time. This particular photograph is of an Iron Age gate complex at Megiddo. We'll come back to Megiddo after a little bit. Let's talk about the Sea Peoples. The Philistines, or Sea Peoples, are shown here on a relief in Egypt. The Philistines are a major problem for Israel during this whole period. During the time of the late judges and the early period of the kings, the Philistines were always a problem. They came both by sea and by land. They were a migratory people group. So there were women and children in the baggage train. And they came and they settled. The Philistines are a problem for us on a bunch of levels. But we do know that they were an Indo-European people. They probably came out of the Greek islands in the period around 1200 BC. They came through Asia Minor, destroyed the Hittite Empire in what we know as the Trojan Wars. Homer's epics, the great Iliad and Odyssey epics about the Trojan Wars, come out of this period. By the time the Philistines got to Canaan, the Sea Peoples, they had dispersed into separate groups. The group that we call Philistines settled in the southern coastal plain of Israel. The name Philistines is, in fact, the basis of the modern term Palestine. The Romans called this place Palestina in order to distinguish, well, actually, in order to poke a stick at Israel. They really didn't like the Jews or Israelites. The Egyptians repelled the Sea Peoples. This relief, the photographs that you see here on the page, is actually the Egyptians defeating the Sea Peoples off the coast of Israel. And the Sea Peoples stopped there, didn't get any farther south during the time of Ramses the Third, around 1200 BC, 1158 to 1180 or so. They may have been Egyptian mercenaries. They may have conquered the area on their own, but we do know that they fought with Egypt and were stopped here. The Philistine sites that we've found are well stocked with wine jugs and beer mugs. W.F. Albright, William Albright, the famous archaeologist, inferred that these people were mighty carousers. Carousing is the drunken parties that they got into. The Philistines' main god was the fertility god Dagon, who is a grain god of sorts. We used to think that he was a half fish, but that's not true. Dagon is a god of grains and a fertility god. Okay, let's look briefly at Gideon. He's kind of fun. Gideon did his thing in the Jezreel Valley, and again, we're looking at Jezreel Valley. This is the spring of Herod on the right, actually on the left as well. There's a modern state park on the site, and children come to play in a wading pool, and their families have picnics. It's a very nice place, and we're where I was standing to take this photograph on the left overlooks the Jezreel Valley spot where the Midianites would have been set up. Gideon's story is interesting. We see it in Judges 6, 7, 8. Gideon was called by God while he was threshing wheat in a wine press. Not a good place to start. He knocked down the fertility altar of his father. Again, not a good sign. God made him reduce his forces for the confrontation. We can clearly find the place. We can't prove the details, but the place that it happened was right here at the spring. The spring of Herod comes out of the lower part of a cliff and the water runs down into the valley. This had to be the spot where Gideon did this thing. His story looks like this. And again, we're up in the Jezreel Valley at the top, Ephraim at the bottom. Jerusalem is just off the map on the right, and the territory of Gad is on the top of this map. So what do we know about this one? Gideon's story starts off in a place called Ophrah, Ophrah, which is modern Afula, an Arab town today. And he met his angel there at Ophrah. The exploit with the 300 men and choosing who would be with him and who would have to go home was done here at the spring of Herod, Harrod, not the same as Herod the Great, different name altogether. The battle took place just north of this. The Midianites were in between the spring of Herod and a low hill called Mount Moreh. The defeat sent them down the Jezreel Valley, down the Jordan Valley, off into the Transjordan, and it's there that the men of Ephraim finally tried to get in on the fun. We see that retreat happening there. Afterwards, Gideon had a son whose name is Abimelech. The people say, "Won't you please be our king?" And Gideon says, "Oh no, I certainly won't be your king." And yet he took all the trappings of kingship. He had multiple wives. He became very rich, and he named his son Abimelech, which means my father is the king. So Gideon is a mixed bag. This, I think, is all support for the idea that Samuel wrote the book of Judges. Samuel tried to talk the people of Israel out of crowning a king. He didn't think that was a good idea. And I think Samuel was right. And I think he wrote the book of Judges in order to show us just how bad a king could really be. At any rate, Abimelech and his shameful story happened there in the central hill country around Shechem. Jephthah and Samson and Ruth take us down to the end of the Judges story. Jephthah happens in the Transjordan. This photograph on the left is at actually a Decapolis area over in the modern state of Jordan. The photograph in the center doesn't look like much. That was the hometown of Samson. And the photograph on the right is from Bethlehem, which is the home base of Ruth. So Jephthah, Samson, and Ruth take us down to the ends of this. Jephthah's exploits happened with the Ammonites, who wanted the Israelites to vacate the Transjordan. His answer that we've been here 300 years, you've never said a word, is important for chronology. This agrees with our data from the Book of Kings and from elsewhere. Samson is from Bet Shemesh, and we know he fought the Philistines. Samson was a Danite, and Samson was a mixed success. We know that the Philistines continued to be a problem long after the time of Samson, and that the Danites ended up migrating out of this territory because Samson didn't drive out the Philistines. Samson had the power to drive out the Philistines, but he didn't do it. Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, did their thing in Bethlehem, just north of Jerusalem. Little map here. Jephthah is the Transjordanian judge, and I can give you a little bit of background on him. His war with the Ammonites began when the Ammonites were demanding that he return the land that Moses took from Sihon and Og in the Transjordan. The most important part of the story is the 300-year line. Jephthah is interesting, terribly flawed. He may well have sacrificed his daughter on an altar. That would have been a terrible thing. And it might have happened. We don't know. Samson operates primarily in the territory of Dan, here in the Sorek Valley, which is one of the three approaches up into the hill country around Jerusalem. You can see Jerusalem way over on the right-hand side of this map. It's not actually listed there, but just north of Bethlehem. The tribe of Dan did a lot of stuff wrong, and eventually they left. Samson was not a good role model for anybody. The Philistines operated in several areas. There are 5 cities that we associate with the Philistines. Ashkelon was their capital city and cultural center. That's probably where the temple was that Samson brought down at the end of his life. Gaza is one of the more important military points. It fended off the southern part of the Philistine country from the Egyptians. Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath have less of a role in Samson's story, but they're still there. Those are the 5 Philistine cities. And later on, when we get to the David story, we find David interacting with these same Philistines. So Samson didn't drive them out at all. They continued to be a problem. The Philistines were on the west side. the Ammonites on the east side, and Israel was squished in between the two throughout much of their early history. We have a little bit of external stuff. The travels of Wen-Ammon are interesting. Shortly after the Sea peoples were defeated by Ramses, around 1200 BC, Egyptian fortunes in the region just declined rapidly. And Egypt was split into a small semi-independent states for a period of time. We don't hear a lot from Egypt for about 300 years. And during that time, we find a story called The Travels of Wen-Ammon that are again meant as humor, as satire. An official of the Temple of Ammon at Karnak by the name of Wen-Ammon was sent to Byblos in Lebanon to get timbers for the god's ceremonial barge. And the official, whose name was Wen-Ammon, traveled along the coast to Dor on the left, a port city in modern Israel, and eventually all the way to Byblos, which is this photograph in the right. His experience was a whole lot different than the adventures of Sinuhe 1,000 years before. At Dor, he was given food, but had all his money stolen. Despairing of getting it back, he traveled on to Byblos via Tyre, and at Byblos, he was belittled by the king and other officials while he tried to get more money for his mission. The gifts from Egypt finally arrived, but they were grudgingly accepted by the officials. And a warship from Dor arrived, and when Ammon fled for his life, he arrived at the coast of Cyprus, of all places. And at that point, his story breaks off with the end of the tablet, and we don't know what happens next. Egypt was in a time of decline. The Hittites, to the north in Asia Minor, had been destroyed by the Philistines. We know that the Mesopotamian power was in, the nice word is transition. They were experiencing a great reset, and everybody was fighting with everybody else. Egypt was also declining. So Egypt in the south, the Hittites and the Mesopotamians in the north. And so there are no great powers in the world. From about 1100 BC until about 930 BC, the great powers of the ancient world stopped being major players. One scholar has used the phrase, "While the cat's away, the mice will play." And so the little countries, Israel, became an independent nation. And along with Israel, other countries in the area, Tyre and Sidon, the Syrians, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, became players. And when we begin seeing those interactions during the time of the kings, those are the major interactions. And it will be about 930 or so BC by the time we see Egypt back on the map. And the northern power, which will next be Assyria. Assyria is not here. So the major powers are gone, and Israel's first national existence will happen surrounded by the little guys. Okay, when we get together on Wednesday, we're going to begin here with the beginnings of the kingship and the judgeship and prophecy ministry of Samuel. Samuel is a fascinating character, and we're only going to have a few minutes with him. Okay. You guys are so good. Let me see if I can make this happen. Oh, there's somebody saying I'm learning to read the map sideways. Good for you. Yeah. Thanks, Don. Okay, we'll let you unmute. Yeah, reading the map sideways is an important skill if you're going to study Old Testament and New Testament. The map always goes up sideways because if you hang it the other way, there's not room to see everything. So I always do it that way. Okay, guys, love you all. Stay warm. Stay happy. Stay well.
We have no problem here staying warm.
No, okay, that's you, Don. I hear you. Yes, some of the others look like they're all bundled up for March weather in Italy. I miss Italy in March. So anyway, bye everybody. We'll see you.
Thank you so
on
much.
Wednesdays. Okay, guys.
Grazie, grazie.
God bless all.
Dr.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Bye bye, Oscar.
Bye.